She was 18 when they destroyed her world, pregnant, powerless, cast out with nothing but $5,000 and threats that would silence her forever. They told her she was not good enough for their golden son, that she never would be. They were wrong. 18 years later, Grace Barnes controls a $200 million empire built from nothing but determination and brilliance. She has returned not as the broken girl they expelled, but as the woman who will decide their fate. In the boardroom, where family legacies are born and die, she will face the man who broke her heart and discover that some victories are worth waiting a lifetime to claim. Power has shifted. The girl they tried to destroy has become the woman they cannot defeat, and she is just getting started. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Hello, David. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The words cut through the silence of the Wittman Industries boardroom like a blade through silk. David Michael Wittmann looked up from the acquisition documents spread across the mahogany table, his blue eyes widening in disbelief as they focused on the woman standing in the doorway. It could not be her, not after 18 years. Grace Elellanena Barnes stepped into the room with the fluid confidence of someone who owned every space she entered. The auburn hair he remembered falling in teenage waves around her shoulders was now styled in a sophisticated bob, threaded with early silver that caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her green eyes, once soft with young love, now held the sharp intelligence of a woman who had conquered every challenge thrown at her. She wore a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and she wore it like armor. Grace. David's voice came out as barely a whisper, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after nearly 2 decades of silence. Mr. Wittmann, she corrected, settling into the leather chair across from him with practiced ease. I prefer to keep things professional. The correction hit him like a physical blow. She placed a sleek leather briefcase on the table between them and opened it with deliberate precision. Inside, David caught a glimpse of documents that would either save his family's company or end its 120-year legacy forever. You look surprised, Grace observed, her voice carrying the subtle authority that came with years of commanding boardrooms filled with powerful men. Did you expect someone else? David struggled to process what he was seeing. The last time he had seen Grace Barnes, she had been a 19-year-old community college student working 2 jobs to pay for her classes. She had worn discount store clothing and driven a 15-year-old Honda that broke down more often than it ran. She had been beautiful then, but in the uncertain way of young women still growing into themselves. The woman sitting across from him now radiated the kind of confidence that came from winning battles most people never even fought. We thought Secure Gen Technologies was owned by a consortium, David managed, his business training finally kicking in despite his emotional upheaval. The acquisition proposal came through intermediaries. It does. I am the consortium. Grace extracted a document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. 100% ownership, actually. Has been since inception 12 years ago. David stared at the corporate filing documents, his mind racing to connect the dots between the teenage girl he had loved and lost and the tech industry powerhouse sitting before him. Secure Gen Technologies was not just successful, it was legendary. The company had prevented cyber attacks on major infrastructure, held contracts with 3 different government agencies, and had recently been valued at $200 million. How? The question escaped him before he could stop it. Grace's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Hard work, Mr. Wittmann, something you might consider trying. The barb found its mark. David had spent the last 5 years watching his family's manufacturing empire crumble despite his best efforts. Wittman Industries, once the pride of the industrial Midwest, was hemorrhaging money at a rate of $2 million per month. Foreign competition, failed modernization attempts, and his late father's resistance to change had brought them to this moment. To her, the offer stands at $30 million, Grace continued, her tone as businesslike as if they were discussing the weather. Given your current debt load and declining assets, I would consider that generous. David forced himself to look at the numbers rather than at her face. The offer was more than generous. It was a lifeline. With Wittman Industries $25 million in debt and the company losing value every quarter, Grace was essentially offering to pay them $5 million to take over their problems. There are conditions, she added, turning to another section of documents. Of course there are. David leaned back in his chair, trying to regain some semblance of professional composure. What kind of conditions? All current management will be terminated immediately upon transfer of ownership. The board will be dissolved. Company operations will be restructured completely. Grace's voice remained steady, but David caught something else beneath the surface. Not cruelty, exactly, but a satisfaction that spoke of justice, delayed but not denied, including me. Especially you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. David studied her face, searching for any trace of the girl who had once laughed at his terrible jokes and fallen asleep in his arms after studying for her business classes. He found nothing but professional competence and carefully controlled power. Grace, we need to talk about... Miss Barnes, she interrupted smoothly. And no, Mr. Wittmann, we do not need to talk about anything beyond the terms of this acquisition. Personal history is irrelevant to business decisions. But David could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. She was not as unaffected as she wanted him to believe. What happened to you? He asked quietly. After you left, I mean, where did you go? For just a moment, something flickered in Grace's green eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Then it was gone, replaced by the same professional mask she had worn since walking into the room. I went everywhere you could not follow, she said simply. I became everything you said I could never be. I never said. Your mother did. And you let her. Grace closed the folder with a sharp snap. But that was a long time ago, Mr. Wittmann. Ancient history. David felt his chest tighten with emotions he had spent years trying to forget. Grace, please. I looked for you. After graduation, I tried to find you, but you had disappeared completely. Not disappeared, Grace corrected, standing and smoothing her skirt with practiced efficiency. Evolved. She walked to the window, her heels clicking against the polished floor with each step. Below them, the city of Columbus stretched out in all directions, a testament to Midwestern ambition and industrial heritage. Somewhere in those streets, 18 years ago, two young people had fallen in love and made plans for a future that never came to pass. You have 48 hours to consider the offer, Grace said without turning around. After that, I move on to other opportunities. Other opportunities. Your company is not the only failing enterprise in this market, Mr. Wittmann. It is simply the most personally satisfying to acquire. David stood as well, moving closer to her, but maintaining a careful distance. Up close, he could smell her perfume, something expensive and sophisticated that suited the woman she had become. It was nothing like the drugstore vanilla she had worn in college. Grace, I know I do not have the right to ask, but I need to understand what happened. Why did you leave without saying goodbye? We had plans. We were going to what? Grace turned to face him, and for the first time since entering the room, her mask slipped slightly. Get married, raise a family, build a life together. Her laugh held no humor. Your mother made it very clear that those plans were never going to happen. My mother, David felt confusion wash over him. What does she have to do with any of this? Grace studied his face for a long moment, and David had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing something he did not understand. "You really do not know, do you?" she said finally. "Know what?" But Grace was already moving toward the door, her briefcase in hand and her professional composure fully restored. 48 hours, Mr. Wittmann, she repeated. "I suggest you use them wisely. Grace, wait." She paused in the doorway without turning around. "It is Miss Barnes, Mr. Wittmann. I would appreciate it if you could remember that." And then she was gone, leaving David alone in the boardroom with the scent of her perfume and the weight of 18 years' worth of unanswered questions. He sank back into his chair and stared at the acquisition documents she had left behind. $30 million to save his family's legacy, but at what cost? And what had his mother done all those years ago that Grace remembered but he did not? David reached for his phone, then stopped. Some questions, he realized, could only be answered by the person who had the power to destroy everything he had left. The girl he had loved was gone, replaced by a woman who held his future in her hands, and she was just getting started. The call came at 6:15 the next morning, jarring David from the first real sleep he had managed in weeks. He fumbled for his phone, hoping against hope that it might be Grace calling to explain the previous day's bombshell revelation. Instead, his assistant's voice greeted him with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Wittmann, you need to get to the office immediately. There are reporters outside the building." David sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Reporters? What kind of reporters?" "Business journalists from the Columbus Dispatch and Industrial Weekly. They are asking about the acquisition rumors and something about Secure Gen Technologies. Sir, how did they find out about the meeting?" That was an excellent question, and David suspected he knew the answer. Grace Barnes did not strike him as someone who made moves without considering every angle, including publicity. If word had leaked about the acquisition, it was because she wanted it to leak. "I will be there in 30 minutes, David said, already moving toward his closet. "Do not let them into the building, and do not comment on anything." "Yes, sir. But Mr. Wittmann, there is something else." David paused in the act of pulling on his shirt. "What?" "Your mother called. She wants to see you immediately. She said it was about Miss Barnes." A chill ran down David's spine. His mother had not mentioned Grace's name in 18 years. For her to bring it up now, less than 24 hours after Grace's unexpected return, suggested a connection David was only beginning to understand. "Tell her I will be there after I handle the press situation." "Sir, she was quite insistent. She said, and I quote, 'The damage has already been done. The least he can do is face the truth like a man.'" David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of family secrets pressing down on him like a physical burden. Whatever his mother had done 18 years ago, Grace's return had forced it into the light. "Fine. Tell her I will be there within the hour." The drive to his mother's estate took him through the older section of Columbus, where established money had built mansions designed to last for generations. The Wittmann family compound sat on 5 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, a testament to 4 generations of industrial success. And now, David reflected bitterly, a monument to his failure to maintain that legacy. Eleanor Wittmann was waiting for him in the morning room, dressed in a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 71, she still carried herself with the bearing of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world's hierarchy. But something was different this morning. Her usually perfect composure showed cracks, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "Mother." David kissed her cheek dutifully before taking the seat across from her. "You wanted to see me about Grace?" "Grace Barnes." Eleanor spoke the name like it tasted bitter on her tongue. "So she has returned. You knew she would." Eleanor's laugh held no warmth. "I have been tracking her success for years, David. Did you think a girl that brilliant would simply disappear forever?" David stared at his mother, feeling as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in his adult life. "Tracking her? Why would you—" He stopped. Pieces of a puzzle he had not known existed beginning to fall into place. "What did you do, Mother? What I had to do to protect this family?" "That is not an answer." Eleanor set down her coffee cup with deliberate care and looked directly at her son. "She was pregnant, David." The words hit him like a physical blow. David felt the air leave his lungs as if he had been punched in the stomach. "What?" "Grace Barnes was pregnant when she left town 18 years ago." "Pregnant with your child?" The morning room spun around David as he tried to process what he was hearing. "That is impossible. She would have told me. We were planning our future together. She would never have—" "She tried to tell you." Eleanor's voice was steady now, the voice of a woman confessing sins she had carried for nearly 2 decades. "She came here, to this house, 3 days before she disappeared. She was maybe 8 weeks along, scared out of her mind, asking for your help." David gripped the arms of his chair so tightly, his knuckles went white. And I told her you wanted nothing to do with her or her problem. I gave her $5,000 and made it clear that any attempt to contact you or this family again would result in legal action for harassment and extortion." The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at his mother, trying to reconcile the woman who had raised him with the monster who had just confessed to destroying the 2 most important relationships in his life. "You lied to her." His voice was barely a whisper. "I protected you, and this family. You destroyed everything." David exploded, shooting to his feet. "Everything that mattered to me, you destroyed." Eleanor did not flinch. "You were 21 years old, David, a child yourself. That girl was from a completely different world, with no money, no family connections, no ability to contribute to this family's legacy. What kind of future could you have had with someone like that?" "A happy one!" David shouted, pacing to the window and staring out at the perfectly manicured grounds. "A real one. Grace was brilliant, Mother. She was kind and funny, and she loved me for who I was, not what I represented. She was a nobody from the wrong side of town who got pregnant to trap a wealthy man." David spun around, his eyes blazing with 18 years of suppressed fury. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and you stole her from me. I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life." "No," David said quietly, his anger crystallizing into something colder and more dangerous. "You caused me to make the biggest mistake of my life because I let you." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "David, please. I was trying to protect a child." The words came out as a broken whisper. "I have a child." "Had," Eleanor corrected. "You had a child. What happened to it after she left is not our concern." David looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. The woman who had raised him, who had taught him about responsibility and family honor, had committed an act of cruelty so profound that it had shaped the last 18 years of his life. "Get out," he said quietly. "David, I know you are upset, but get out of my sight before I say something we will both regret." Eleanor stood with dignity intact, despite the circumstances. "I did what any mother would do to protect her child." "No," David said, his voice deadly calm. "You did what a selfish, cruel woman would do to maintain control, and you have been lying to me about it for 18 years." After his mother left, David sat alone in the morning room as the full implications of her confession settled over him. Grace had not left him by choice. She had been driven away, pregnant and alone, by his own family. And somewhere out there, he had a child he had never known existed, a child who was now 17 years old. David reached for his phone with shaking hands. He needed to call Grace, needed to find some way to begin making amends for a betrayal he had not even known he had committed. But as he scrolled through his contacts, he realized he did not have her number. After 18 years, the woman who held his company's future in her hands was as unreachable as she had been the day she disappeared. Except now, he understood why she had disappeared and why she had come back. Grace Barnes stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 32nd floor of the Secure Gen Technologies building, watching the Columbus skyline emerge from the morning mist. From this height, the city looked manageable, controllable, a collection of problems that could be solved with the right combination of strategy and resources. If only human emotions were as simple to navigate as business challenges. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant. Wittman Industries, stock down 12% in early trading. Business press requesting comment on acquisition rumors. Grace smiled grimly. Phase 1 of her return was proceeding exactly as planned. By this time next week, the entire business community would know that the former teenage girlfriend David Wittmann's family had cast aside was now in a position to determine his company's fate. Justice, Grace had learned over the years, was a dish best served with perfect timing and maximum publicity. Another text appeared on her screen, this one from her son. Saw the news about Wittman Industries. You sure about this, Mum? Grace's expression softened as she typed back, I'm sure about protecting our future. Are you ready for school? Already at MIT orientation weekend, remember? But seriously, are you going to tell him? Grace's fingers hovered over the phone's keyboard. Tell him. Such simple words for such a complicated decision. For 17 years, she had protected Liam from the knowledge that his father's family had rejected him before he was even born. But now, with David's shocked face burned into her memory from yesterday's meeting, she wondered if her protective silence had been the right choice. We will talk when you get back, she typed finally. Love you, Mom. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Grace laughed, despite her complex emotions. At 17, Liam Barnes was more mature and level-headed than most adults she knew. He also happened to be worth approximately $20 million in Secure Gen stock, making him one of the wealthiest teenagers in Ohio. Not that David knew any of that yet. Grace walked to her desk and opened the folder containing 18 years of carefully documented research. Inside were newspaper clippings, business reports, and private investigator summaries that told the complete story of David Wittmann's life since her expulsion from Columbus. College graduation with honors, Harvard MBA, marriage to Sarah Pemberton, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, rapid rise through the ranks of Wittman Industries as his father's health declined. Divorce after 6 years when Sarah decided she preferred her tennis instructor to her husband. His father's death 3 years ago, leaving David in charge of a company already in decline. And through it all, no children, no family of his own. No idea that he had a son who was brilliant, accomplished, and completely uninterested in forming a relationship with the father who had abandoned him. Grace's intercom buzzed. Miss Barnes, you have a visitor. He says it is urgent and personal. Grace did not need to ask who it was. She had been expecting this conversation since the moment she walked out of the Wittman Industries boardroom yesterday. Send him up. 5 minutes later, David Wittmann stood in her office doorway, looking like he had not slept in weeks. His usually immaculate business attire was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his blue eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of recent, devastating revelations. Miss Barnes, he said formally, though his voice cracked slightly on her name. Mr. Wittmann. Grace gestured to the chairs arranged around a small conference table near the windows. "I assume this is about our business arrangement?" David sat heavily, as if the weight of what he had learned was too much to bear standing. "My mother told me what she did." Grace had prepared for this moment for months, but hearing the words still sent a spike of old pain through her chest. She forced her expression to remain neutral. "Which part?" "All of it. The money, the threats. The lies she told both of us." David looked up at her with eyes full of regret and something that might have been hope. "Grace, I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew you were pregnant. If you had known, what would you have done?" Grace's voice was steady, but David caught the underlying steel. "Married me out of obligation, supported me financially while resenting the burden, chosen between me and your family." David opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. They both knew that at 21, faced with an unplanned pregnancy and his mother's opposition, he might not have made the choices he wanted to believe he would have made. "I would have tried to do the right thing," he said finally. "The right thing according to whom? Your mother? Your social circle? The family legacy you were supposed to protect?" Grace walked to her desk and retrieved a photograph, which she placed on the table between them. "Or the right thing according to him?" David stared at the photo with the intensity of a man seeing a miracle. The image showed a young man in a MIT sweatshirt, green eyes bright with intelligence and ambition, dark hair catching the sunlight as he smiled at the camera. He looked exactly like David had at that age, but with Grace's coloring and expression. "My God," David breathed. "He looks like you." "Yes, I know." Grace sat across from him, her posture perfect despite the emotional weight of the moment. "His name is Liam David Barnes. He's 17 years old, graduating as salutatorian of his high school class, and he will be attending MIT in the fall on a full academic scholarship." David could not take his eyes off the photograph. "Liam David, you gave him my name. I gave him part of your name. The rest he has earned himself. Where is he? I need to meet him. I need to explain. He knows who you are, David." Grace's use of his first name seemed to surprise them both. "I have never lied to him about his father, but he also knows that your family rejected him before he was born." The words hit David like physical blows. "Grace, please, let me talk to him. Let me try to make this right." "Make what right, exactly? 17 years of missed birthdays, missed baseball games and science fairs and graduation ceremonies, the fact that he built his first computer at age 12 and published his first cybersecurity research paper at 15, and you were not there for any of it." David closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had lost. "I know I cannot undo the past, but maybe I can be part of his future." Grace studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of the young man she had once loved desperately enough to build a life around. What she saw was older, more weathered by disappointment and responsibility, but essentially the same person who had made her laugh until her sides hurt and dream of possibilities beyond her circumstances. Liam is not a consolation prize, David. He is not something you get to claim because you feel guilty about the past. I know that, but he is my son. He is my son, Grace corrected firmly. You are his biological father. There is a difference. David absorbed the distinction with visible pain. What does he think about all this? About me? About the acquisition? He thinks you are the man whose family drove his pregnant mother out of town with threats and money. He thinks you are the man who let a century-old company crumble through poor management and inability to adapt. Grace's voice was matter-of-fact, but David could see the protective mother underneath the professional exterior. He also thinks you might be worth salvaging, given proper motivation and supervision. Despite everything, David almost smiled. He sounds like you. He is nothing like me. He is better. Grace stood and walked back to the windows. Liam owns 20% of Secure Gen Technologies through a trust fund I established when he turned 16. At 17 years old, he is worth approximately $20 million. David felt the air leave his lungs for the second time in 2 days. 20 million, 23.7 million as of this morning's market valuation. He will gain full access to the funds when he turns 18 in 8 months. Grace turned to face him. Your son, David, is more financially successful than you have ever been, and he achieved it without any help from the Wittmann family legacy. The irony was not lost on David. The child his mother had dismissed as a burden who would contribute nothing to their family's standing was now worth more than the family business itself. I want to meet him, David said quietly, not because of the money, because he is my son. Grace walked back to the table and retrieved the photograph. He will be back from MIT orientation on Sunday. We will discuss it then. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, David. Liam has some very strong opinions about absent fathers and family responsibilities. Meeting him might not go the way you hope. David looked at her with something approaching his old confidence. I will take that chance. Grace nodded once, then returned to business mode. In the meantime, you still have 24 hours to respond to my acquisition offer. About that, David straightened in his chair. I accept your terms. Grace raised an eyebrow. All of them, including the management restructuring, all of them. Even knowing that you will be terminated as senior executive vice president? David met her gaze steadily. Even knowing that my family's company is dying, Grace, you can save it. Maybe some of those 800 employees can keep their jobs if you take over. And what will you do? David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Learn what I should have learned 18 years ago, that some things are more important than family legacy and social standing. Grace felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of anger she had carried so long it had become part of her identity. This was not the response she had expected from the privileged young man who had let his mother drive her away. This was something else entirely, something that might eventually lead to forgiveness. I will have the contracts prepared for signature by tomorrow afternoon, she said briskly. And Liam, Sunday dinner, 6 o'clock. My house. Grace handed him a business card with her personal address. David. Yes. Do not disappoint him. He has already had enough disappointment for one lifetime. After David left, Grace stood at her window for a long time, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the city below. Phase 2 of her return was about to begin, and she was not entirely certain she was prepared for what came next. Revenge, it turned out, was much simpler than forgiveness, but forgiveness, she was beginning to realize, might be worth the risk. Eleanor Wittmann sat in her morning room, staring at the acquisition announcement in the Columbus Business Journal with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. The headline was brutal in its simplicity. Local tech CEO acquires Wittman Industries in hostile takeover. But it was the accompanying photograph that made her hand shake as she reached for her morning medication. Grace Barnes, looking every inch the successful businesswoman in a tailored black suit, stood outside the Wittman Industries building with a slight smile that could only be described as triumphant. The girl Eleanor had dismissed as a fortune-hunting nobody had returned as a conqueror. The telephone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning silence like an accusation. Eleanor considered letting it go to voicemail, but caller discipline was a habit of a lifetime. Eleanor Wittmann speaking. Mother. David's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. We need to talk. I assume you have seen the newspaper. I have seen a lot of things lately. Things I should have seen 18 years ago. Eleanor closed her eyes. She had hoped for more time before this confrontation, time to prepare her arguments and marshal her defenses. But Grace Barnes had moved with the ruthless efficiency that had apparently built her empire. David, I know you are upset. Upset? David's laugh held no humor. Mother, I am destroyed. Do you understand what you have done? What you cost me? I cost you? Eleanor's voice sharpened with defensive anger. I saved you from a disastrous mistake that would have ruined your entire future. You ruined my future. Grace was the best thing that ever happened to me, and you drove her away with lies and threats. She was a pregnant teenager from a broken home with no money and no prospects. What kind of life could you have built with someone like that? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Eleanor wondered if David had hung up. The kind of life that mattered, he said finally. The kind of life where I would have been happy. David, please, you are not thinking clearly. That girl, that woman just bought our family company for $30 million. That woman built a $200 million empire from nothing. That woman raised my son to be more successful at 17 than I have been in my entire life. David's voice grew stronger with each word. And that woman is everything I should have chosen 18 years ago. Your son? Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her carefully constructed world. David, surely you do not believe... I have seen him, Mother. I have seen photographs. He looks exactly like I did at his age. Eleanor sank into her chair as the full implications of Grace's return crystallized around her. A grandson, a brilliant, successful grandson she had rejected before he was born. Where is he now? At MIT. Orientation weekend for incoming students. He starts in the fall on a full academic scholarship. David paused. He also owns $20 million in stock in his mother's company. The phone slipped from Eleanor's suddenly nerveless fingers. $20 million. Her grandson was worth $20 million, and she had never even known he existed. Mother, are you there? Eleanor retrieved the phone with shaking hands. I am here. I am meeting him on Sunday at Grace's house. David, I want to... No. The word was final, absolute. You have done enough damage for one lifetime. After David disconnected, Eleanor sat in the growing afternoon shadows, staring at the newspaper photograph of the woman who had become everything she had never imagined possible. Grace Barnes was not the broken girl who had left town 18 years ago. She was a force of nature who had returned to claim what was hers, and Eleanor was finally beginning to understand that what Grace was claiming included not just Wittman Industries, but David himself. The realization that she might have lost her son forever was almost more than Eleanor could bear, but it was the knowledge that she had a grandson she might never meet that broke her heart completely. 3 hours later, Eleanor Wittmann made a decision that went against every instinct of pride and control she had cultivated over 7 decades of life. She picked up the phone and dialed information. I need the number for Secure Gen Technologies, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. Connecting you now. The receptionist who answered was professional and efficient. Secure Gen Technologies. How may I direct your call? I need to speak with Miss Grace Barnes. Tell her it is Eleanor Wittmann calling. Please hold. Eleanor waited, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. After nearly 5 minutes, the line clicked. Mr. Wittmann. Grace's voice was coolly professional, but Eleanor caught the underlying steel. I assume this is about Sunday's dinner arrangements. Miss Barnes, Eleanor forced herself to use the respectful address. I was hoping we could speak privately before then. About what? About my grandson. The silence stretched between them, across 18 years of mutual antagonism and carefully nursed grievances. You gave up the right to call him that when you paid me to disappear, Grace said finally. I know. I know what I did was wrong. But he is family, Miss Barnes. He is a Wittmann. No. Grace's voice was quiet but implacable. He is a Barnes. He has always been a Barnes, and he will always be a Barnes. Please, I am an old woman with limited time left. I just want to meet him once, to apologize for what I did to all of you. Another long silence. When Grace spoke again, her voice was softer but no less determined. Liam will make his own decisions about who he wants in his life, Mrs. Wittmann. But I will not pressure him to forgive you simply because you are dying. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. Are you saying there is no chance? I am saying that forgiveness is earned, not demanded, and some mistakes cannot be undone simply because we regret making them. What would I have to do to earn that forgiveness? Grace was quiet for so long, Eleanor wondered if she had pushed too far. Tell him the truth, Grace said finally. All of it. What you did and why you did it. Let him decide if your reasons were worth 18 years of his father's absence from his life. And if he decides they were not, then you live with the consequences of your choices, just like I did. The line went dead, leaving Eleanor alone with the weight of nearly 2 decades of poor decisions and their cascading effects. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Wittmann understood that there were some problems money and social position could not solve. Some mistakes required a different kind of payment entirely. Sunday dinner at the Barnes house was not what David had expected. He had imagined something grand, befitting Grace's success, a modern mansion with stark lines and expensive art, the kind of place where wealthy people entertained other wealthy people with impressive views and intimidating architecture. Instead, he found himself standing outside a comfortable 2-story colonial in an established neighborhood where mature oak trees shaded modest lawns and children's bicycles leaned against front porches. The house was well maintained and clearly expensive, but it felt like a home rather than a statement. Grace answered the door wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her business armor of tailored suits and corporate authority, she looked younger, more like the woman he remembered. David, you are exactly on time. Grace. He held up a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package. I brought something for dinner and something for Liam. She accepted both with a slight smile. He is in the kitchen, actually. Fair warning, he has been cooking all afternoon. Apparently, he wanted to make a good impression. David felt his chest tighten with emotion. His son had been cooking for him. What did he make? Beef Wellington, roasted vegetables, and chocolate soufflé. He learned to cook from YouTube videos when he was 12. Grace led him through a living room that managed to be both elegant and comfortable, filled with books and family photographs. He does not do anything halfway. They entered a kitchen that smelled like heaven and looked like a disaster zone. Every surface was covered with bowls, utensils, and ingredients, and standing in the center of it all was David's son. Liam Barnes was tall like his father, but with Grace's coloring and intelligent green eyes. He wore an apron over khakis and a button-down shirt, and his dark hair was disheveled from what appeared to be an intensive cooking session. When he looked up and saw David, he went very still. Liam, Grace said gently, this is your father, David Wittmann. Liam studied David with the kind of frank assessment that was both refreshing and terrifying. David had the distinct impression he was being evaluated according to criteria he did not understand. "Mr. Wittmann." Liam extended his hand with perfect manners. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," David replied, shaking his son's hand and marveling at the strange sensation of touching a piece of his own genetic legacy. "And please, call me David." "I think I will stick with Mr. Wittmann for now," Liam said politely. "Mom, can you check the souffle? I think it is almost ready." Grace moved to the oven with practiced ease, clearly comfortable in the domestic space she and Liam had created together. David watched them work together with the synchronized efficiency of a team that had been perfecting their choreography for years. "Can I help with anything?" David asked. "You can sit," Liam said, gesturing to a breakfast bar with stools. "Cooking is my territory." David perched on one of the stools, feeling awkward and out of place. "Your mother tells me you are going to MIT. Full scholarship for cybersecurity engineering." Liam began plating the beef Wellington with the precision of a professional chef. "Mom offered to pay tuition, but I wanted to earn it myself." "That is impressive." "Is it?" Liam glanced up from his plating. "Or is it just what you do when you do not have family money to fall back on?" The question was asked pleasantly enough, but David caught the edge underneath. This was not going to be the emotional reunion he had half hoped for. "Liam," Grace said quietly, "it is a fair question, Mom." Liam continued plating with careful attention to presentation. "I am curious about what Mr. Wittmann thinks constitutes impressive achievement." David took a breath, recognizing that every word of this conversation mattered in ways he might not understand for years. "I think impressive achievement is building something meaningful with whatever resources you have available," he said carefully. "I think it is choosing to work hard even when you do not have to. And I think it is becoming the kind of person who makes the world better simply by being in it." Liam paused in his plating, considering this answer. "That is a nice answer," he said finally. "Very diplomatic. It is also what I honestly believe. Good, because diplomacy without honesty is just manipulation." Liam moved to the counter where Grace was checking the souffle. "Dinner is ready." They moved to the dining room, where Liam had set the table with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of someone who cared about creating perfect moments. David found himself seated across from his son, with Grace between them at the head of the table. The food was extraordinary. The beef Wellington was perfectly cooked, the vegetables were seasoned with professional skill, and the entire meal was better than anything David had eaten in most restaurants. "This is incredible, Liam. Where did you learn to cook like this?" "YouTube, mostly, and practice." Liam cut his meat with economical movements. "I started cooking when I was 12 because Mum was working 16-hour days building the company. I figured it was the least I could do to contribute." David glanced at Grace, who was focused on her plate with the kind of intensity that suggested she was trying not to cry. "That was very mature of you." "It was very necessary of me," Liam corrected. "There is a difference." David was beginning to understand that his son had been forced to grow up quickly in ways that had nothing to do with privilege or opportunity. "Liam, I want you to know that I never knew about you," David said carefully. "If I had known your mother was pregnant, I would have—" "What? Married her?" Liam's green eyes were steady and challenging. "Supported her financially, chosen her over your family's objections. I would have tried to do the right thing." "The right thing, according to whom?" David realized that Liam was asking the same question Grace had asked, and it was a question David was not sure he could answer satisfactorily. "According to my conscience. According to what I felt for your mother." "And what did you feel for my mother, Mr. Wittmann?" David looked across the table at Grace, who was watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone who needed to hear his answer as much as Liam did. "I loved her," David said simply. "I loved her completely, Sight, and I thought she loved me too. When she disappeared, it broke something in me that never really healed. She disappeared because your mother paid her $5,000 and threatened legal action if she ever contacted you again," Liam said matter-of-factly. "She disappeared because she was 19, pregnant and scared, and the family of the man she loved made it clear she was not welcome." David felt the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him like a physical burden. "I know. I found out about that this week. How did that make you feel?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity, and David realized that his 17-year-old son was conducting an interview with the skill of someone much older and more experienced. "Furious, betrayed, sick to my stomach." David met Liam's eyes directly. "And deeply ashamed that I never looked hard enough to find the truth." Liam nodded as if David had passed some kind of test. "Good. Those are the right answers." "Liam," Grace said softly. "What?" "I'm just trying to understand what kind of man my father is." Liam turned back to David. "For instance, do you want a relationship with me because you feel guilty about the past, or because you actually want to know who I am?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. David realized that this brilliant, self-possessed young man was not going to be impressed by platitudes or easy emotions. "I want to know who you are," David said honestly. "I want to understand how you became so accomplished and mature at 17. I want to know what makes you laugh and what you worry about and what you dream of doing with your life. And I want to be part of your future, if you will let me. Not as a replacement for the father you needed when you were younger, but as someone who can appreciate the man you are becoming." Liam considered this for a long moment, then nodded once. "That is also a good answer. So what happens now?" "Now we get to know each other. Slowly, carefully, with no expectations beyond mutual respect." Liam glanced at his mother, then back at David. "And with the understanding that my loyalty is to the woman who raised me, built an empire, and never once let me doubt that I was loved and valued." David felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I would not expect anything else." "Good." Liam stood to clear the plates. "Who wants chocolate soufflé?" As his son moved around the table with easy confidence, David caught Grace's eye. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, surprise, perhaps, or something that might eventually become approval. "He is extraordinary," David said quietly. "Yes," Grace agreed. "He is. You did an amazing job raising him." Grace's smile was soft and genuine for the first time since his return to her life. "We did an amazing job raising him. He raised himself as much as I raised him." "Grace, I need you to know." "I know," she said simply. "I can see it in your face when you look at him. You love him already." David felt tears threaten for the first time in years. "I do. I love him, and I have loved him from the moment I saw his photograph." "Good," Grace said, echoing her son's earlier assessment, "because he's going to need that love in the years ahead." "Why?" Grace glanced toward the kitchen, where they could hear Liam carefully removing the soufflé from the oven. "Because he is planning to revolutionize cybersecurity technology, and that kind of ambition requires family support," she said. "And because he is 17 years old, no matter how mature he seems, and 17-year-olds need fathers who believe in them." David looked at this woman who had transformed herself from a scared teenager into a tech industry powerhouse while raising an extraordinary son, and felt something shift permanently in his understanding of what strength really meant. Grace? Yes. Thank you for giving me this chance. Do not thank me yet, David. And thank me in 20 years, when we see what kind of man he becomes. I think I already know what kind of man he is becoming. Grace smiled. And for just a moment, David caught a glimpse of the girl he had fallen in love with 18 years ago. So do I, she said. And I think you are both going to be just fine. The call came at 7:30 on Monday morning, jolting Grace from the first peaceful sleep she had managed since returning to Columbus. She fumbled for her phone, expecting her assistant with some crisis requiring immediate attention. Instead, David's voice greeted her, rough with exhaustion and something that might have been desperation. Grace, I need your help. It is my mother. Grace sat up in bed, instantly alert. What happened? She collapsed this morning. The doctors think it might be a stroke, but they are not sure yet. She is at Columbus General, and she... David's voice cracked. She keeps asking for you. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of old grievances warring with unexpected compassion. Eleanor Wittmann had destroyed her life 18 years ago, but she was also Liam's grandmother and David's mother. I will be there in 30 minutes. Grace, you do not have to. Yes, I do. The drive to the hospital gave Grace time to process the complexity of her emotions. Part of her felt a savage satisfaction that Eleanor was finally facing consequences for her actions, but a larger part, the part shaped by 17 years of raising a compassionate son, recognized that some battles were too important to fight on a deathbed. She found David in the cardiac intensive care unit waiting room, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in a hospital chair. How is she? Grace asked, settling into the chair beside him. Stable, for now. The doctors say it was not a stroke, but some kind of cardiac episode brought on by stress and her blood pressure medication. David rubbed his face with both hands. Grace, I know what she did to you. I know you have every right to refuse to see her. But she is dying, and she knows it, and she wants to make amends. Grace studied his profile, noting the lines of exhaustion and grief that had not been there a week ago. What did she tell you? Everything? The money, the legal threats, the lies she told both of us. She has been carrying this guilt for 18 years, and I think it is finally killing her. A nurse approached them with the careful professionalism of someone delivering difficult news. Mr. Wittmann, your mother is awake and asking for Miss Barnes. Are you ready to see her? Grace felt David's eyes on her, but she was already standing. Yes. Eleanor Wittmann looked every one of her 71 years lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that tracked her failing heart with electronic precision. But when she saw Grace enter the room, her eyes sharpened with the intelligence that had once made her a formidable society matriarch. Miss Barnes, Eleanor's voice was weak but clear, thank you for coming. Grace pulled a chair close to the bed, noting how small and fragile Eleanor looked without her usual armor of expensive clothing and imperial bearing. Mrs. Wittmann, I suppose you think this is justice? I suppose I think this is life, Grace replied evenly. We all get old. We all face mortality. Some of us just have more to answer for when we do. Eleanor's laugh was barely a whisper. You do not pull your punches, do you? I learned not to. You taught me that, actually. I imagine I taught you a great deal about survival and determination. Eleanor's eyes focused on Grace with surprising intensity. I have been following your success for years, you know, reading about your company, your achievements. I am not proud of what I did to you, but I am not entirely sorry about how it turned out. Grace felt anger flare in her chest. You destroyed my life. I changed your life. There is a difference. Eleanor struggled to sit up higher in the bed. If you had stayed, if you had married David at 19, what would have happened? You would have been trapped in a world that never valued your intelligence or ambition. You would have spent your life being the appropriate wife to a wealthy man, raising children in a social circle that would have suffocated your spirit. That should have been my choice to make. Yes, it should have, and I was wrong to take that choice away from you. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears for the first time Grace had ever seen. But I was not wrong about what you were capable of becoming. Grace stared at this dying woman who had shaped her life in ways both terrible and profound. You think that justifies what you did? No, I think it explains why I can face my death with some small measure of peace. Eleanor reached out with a trembling hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Grace took it. I took away your choice 18 years ago, but you made choices anyway. You chose to fight. You chose to succeed. You chose to build something extraordinary while raising an extraordinary son. I chose to survive. You chose to thrive. And that, Miss Barnes, is something no one could have taught you. It was already inside you, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Grace felt unexpected tears threaten. You broke my heart. Yes, I did. And you used those broken pieces to build something stronger than it ever could have been whole. Eleanor squeezed Grace's hand with surprising strength. Tell me about my grandson. For the next hour, Grace found herself describing Liam's childhood, his achievements, his personality, his dreams for the future. Eleanor listened with the hungry attention of someone trying to absorb 17 years of missed experiences in a single conversation. He sounds remarkable. He is. Despite everything, he is. I would like to meet him, if he is willing. Grace considered this request, weighing Liam's emotional well-being against Eleanor's genuine remorse. That will be his decision to make. Of course. Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Miss Barnes. Yes. Take care of my son. He has made mistakes, but his heart was always in the right place. David can take care of himself. Can he? He has spent his entire adult life trying to live up to a legacy that was already crumbling when he inherited it. He needs someone who believes in what he could become, not what he has always been. Eleanor fell asleep before Grace could respond, leaving her alone with thoughts too complex to untangle easily. When she returned to the waiting room, David was pacing by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I understand the production deadlines, but we need to prioritize employee safety over shipping schedules, he was saying with the kind of firm authority Grace had not heard from him before. Implement the new protocols immediately and send me a written report by 5 o'clock. He ended the call and turned to Grace with an expression of cautious hope. How is she? Tired, dying, trying to make peace with her conscience. Grace sat down heavily, feeling emotionally drained. She wants to meet Liam. What did you tell her? That it is his choice. David nodded, understanding the wisdom of not pressuring their son to forgive before he was ready. What do you think he will decide? I think he will surprise us both. He usually does. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the controlled chaos of a hospital in the early evening hours. Grace found herself studying David's profile, noting the changes that loss and responsibility had carved into his features. You handled that phone call well, she said finally. Secure Gen is not the only company implementing new safety protocols. Your acquisition came with some very specific recommendations for operational improvements. Grace raised an eyebrow. You have been reading my reports. Every word. Your analysis of our manufacturing inefficiencies was brutal and completely accurate. David turned to face her fully. I have been running my family's company for 3 years, Grace. But I have been learning how to actually lead it for exactly 1 week. What is the difference? The difference is that I finally understand the distinction between managing decline and creating growth." David's blue eyes held a determination she had not seen since their college days. "You did not just buy Wittman Industries, Grace. You saved it. And you are teaching me how to deserve that salvation." Grace felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the professional distance she had maintained since walking back into his life. "David, I did not acquire your company to teach you lessons." "No, you acquired it to prove a point, but maybe we both learned something in the process." "What did we learn?" David was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I learned that the woman I fell in love with 18 years ago became everything I always knew she could be. And maybe, if I work hard enough, I can become the man who deserves to be part of her life again." The words hung between them like a bridge. Grace was not sure she was ready to cross. "David, Grace, I am not asking for anything. I am not expecting anything. I'm just telling you that seeing you with Liam yesterday, watching how you built your life and raised our son, made me realize that everything I thought I wanted was just a pale imitation of what we could have had together." Grace stared at him, seeing past the successful businessman and grieving son to the young man who had once made her believe in possibilities beyond her circumstances. "It is too late for us to go back," she said quietly. "I know. But maybe it is not too late for us to go forward." Before Grace could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Heard about Eleanor from David's assistant. Should I come to the hospital?" Grace showed David the message, and his face lit up with an expression of such hope and gratitude that it made her heart ache. "What should I tell him?" she asked. "Tell him the truth. His grandmother is dying, and she wants to meet him, and it is completely his choice whether or not to give her that chance." Grace typed back, "She is stable but dying, wants to meet you, your choice completely, no pressure either way." Liam's response came immediately, "On my way, be there in 20 minutes." David closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. "I do not know what I did to deserve a son like him." "You loved his mother enough to let her go when she needed to leave," Grace said softly, "even if you did not know that is what you were doing at the time." "Grace, about what I said before." "I know." Grace stood, suddenly needing distance to process the emotional weight of the last few hours. "I need some coffee." "Do you want anything?" "Just for my son to forgive my mother for what she did to his." Grace paused in the doorway, looking back at this man who had broken her heart and was now trying to help heal it. "I think he might surprise you." 20 minutes later, Liam Barnes walked into the cardiac intensive care unit wearing jeans and an MIT sweatshirt, carrying a small bouquet of flowers he had obviously purchased from the hospital gift shop. "Mom." He hugged Grace tightly, and she realized that despite his maturity, he was still her 17-year-old son who needed comfort in difficult situations. "How are you holding up?" "I am fine." "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I am sure I want to make my own decision about it." Liam turned to David with the same serious expression he had worn during Sunday dinner. "How is she?" "Weak, but mentally sharp. She knows she is dying, and she knows she has things to answer for." Liam nodded once, then looked at his parents with the kind of wisdom that should not have belonged to someone his age. "I think we should all go in together. Whatever she has to say, we should hear it as a family." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Liam, you do not have to." "Yes, I do. She is my grandmother, even if she made terrible choices. And you are my parents, even if your relationship is complicated." Liam straightened his shoulders with determination that reminded Grace of herself at his age. "We are family, and families face difficult things together." David reached out and touched his son's shoulder with the reverent care of someone handling something precious and fragile. "Are you sure?" I am sure that I am tired of family secrets and missed opportunities. Liam looked directly at his father. I am sure that forgiveness is something you give for your own peace, not because someone deserves it, and I'm sure that my grandmother needs to meet me before she dies, even if she does not deserve to. Grace felt tears threaten for the second time that day. When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher. Liam smiled at her with the kind of love that had sustained her through 18 years of single parenthood. Now come on, let us go meet my grandmother. Eleanor Wittmann was awake and alert when they entered her hospital room together, and Grace watched her face transform as she saw Liam for the first time. The resemblance to David at that age was unmistakable, but there was something else in Liam's bearing that spoke of strength earned rather than inherited. Grandmother, Liam said simply, moving to her bedside with the flowers. I am Liam Barnes. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she studied her grandson's face. You are beautiful, she whispered. You look like your father, but you have your mother's eyes. I have your eyes too, Liam observed, and Grace realized it was true. Liam had inherited the Wittmann blue-green eyes that had skipped David, but were unmistakable in his grandmother's face. Yes, you do. Eleanor accepted the flowers with trembling hands. Thank you for coming. I was not sure you would. I almost did not, Liam said honestly, pulling up a chair beside the bed. But my parents raised me to believe that everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even if they do not deserve forgiveness. Eleanor looked past Liam to where Grace and David stood together near the window. Your parents raised you well. My mother raised me well, Liam corrected gently but firmly. My father is just getting to know me. The distinction was subtle but important, and Grace saw Eleanor absorb it with the understanding of someone who was finally grasping the full consequences of her actions. I want to tell you something, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. I want to tell you why I did what I did 18 years ago, not to excuse it, but so you understand that it was never about you. It was about me before I was even born, Liam pointed out. You made decisions about my life before I existed. Yes, I did, and I was wrong. Eleanor struggled to sit up higher, and David moved to adjust her pillows with the automatic care of a dutiful son. I was wrong because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that my family's legacy would die with my son. Afraid that everything my husband and his father and his grandfather had built would be lost if David married someone who could not contribute to our social and financial standing. Eleanor's eyes focused on Liam with painful intensity. I was afraid that a poor girl with no connections would drag my family down instead of building it up. So you paid my mother to disappear. I paid your mother $5,000 and threatened legal action if she ever contacted our family again. Eleanor's voice was steady now, unflinching in its honesty. I told her that David wanted nothing to do with her or her pregnancy, and I told David that she had taken the money and left town to pursue other opportunities. Grace felt David stiffen beside her, but Liam remained calm, absorbing this confession with the same serious attention he gave everything else. Did you think about what would happen to me? Liam asked. I thought your mother would handle the situation appropriately. You thought she would get an abortion. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. But she did not, Liam continued. She moved away, had me, and raised me while building a company worth $200 million. And I grew up to be more financially successful than your entire family legacy. Yes, so your plan failed completely. Eleanor's laugh was bitter but genuine. Spectacularly. Liam leaned back in his chair, studying his grandmother with the analytical mind that had earned him a full scholarship to one of the world's best universities. Do you regret what you did? I regret the pain I caused. I regret the lost years. I regret that I never got to know the extraordinary young man you became." Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I do not regret that your mother was forced to discover her own strength. She might never have built her empire if she'd been comfortable in our world. That was not your choice to make." "No, it was not. And I'm sorry for taking that choice away from her." Liam was quiet for a long moment, and Grace could see him processing this conversation with the same methodical approach he applied to complex problems. "I forgive you," he said finally. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "Just like that? Not just like that. I forgive you because holding on to anger about things that happened before I was born will not help me build the life I want to live." Liam leaned forward slightly. "But forgiveness is not the same as trust, and it is not the same as relationship. You will have to earn those things if you live long enough." Grace felt pride swell in her chest as she watched her son navigate this complex emotional situation with wisdom that surpassed most adults. "What would I need to do to earn your trust?" Liam glanced at his parents, then back at Eleanor. "Tell my father everything. All the lies you told, all the manipulation you used, all the years you kept us apart. He deserves to know the full truth. And then we see what happens. Maybe we build a relationship, maybe we do not. But it will be based on honesty instead of secrets." Eleanor nodded, understanding that her grandson was offering her more grace than she had any right to expect. "Will you come back to see me?" "If you are still here tomorrow, yes. But I will not make any promises beyond that. That is more than I deserve." "Yes," Liam agreed, "it is." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor called out one more time. "Liam?" "Yes." "Your mother was right to leave. And she was right to build the life she built. I hope someday you will understand that some of the best things that happen to us come from the worst things that happen to us." Liam considered this for a moment. "I think my mother already taught me that lesson, grandmother, but thank you for the reminder." Outside in the hallway, Grace wrapped her arms around her son and held him tightly. "Are you okay?" "I am okay. Are you?" Grace looked over Liam's shoulder at David, who was watching them both with an expression of wonder and gratitude. "I think I am going to be." "Good!" Liam pulled back and looked at both his parents seriously. "Because now we need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" David asked. "I mean, we need to figure out how to be a family. Not the family we might have been 18 years ago, but the family we can choose to become now." Grace felt her heart skip a beat as she realized that her son was not just offering forgiveness to his grandmother. He was offering something far more precious to all of them. He was offering them a chance to start over, together. The conversation took place in the hospital cafeteria over coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the previous century, and vending machine sandwiches that defied easy categorization. It was not the setting Grace would have chosen for one of the most important discussions of her life, but sometimes the most crucial conversations happened in the least likely places. "So here is what I think," Liam said, unwrapping what was allegedly a turkey sandwich with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. "I think we have a choice to make about what kind of family we want to be." Grace and David exchanged glances across the small table. They had been carefully avoiding any direct discussion of their own relationship, focusing instead on their shared concern for Liam and Eleanor's declining health. "What kind of family do you want us to be?" Grace asked carefully. "I want us to be the kind of family that tells the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. I want us to be the kind of family that supports each other's dreams and ambitions. And I want us to be the kind of family that chooses to be together because we want to be, not because we feel obligated." David leaned forward slightly. That sounds ideal. But it might not be that simple, Liam. Your mother and I have a lot of history to work through. Do you? Liam took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. Or do you have a lot of history to finally put behind you? Grace felt her breath catch. Her 17-year-old son was speaking about relationships with a maturity that put most marriage counselors to shame. It is complicated, she said. Is it? Mom, you loved him 18 years ago. Dad, you loved her 18 years ago. You were separated by other people's lies and manipulation, not by anything you did to each other. Liam looked between them with the clear-eyed logic of someone who had not spent decades learning to complicate simple emotions. Do you still love each other? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Neither Grace nor David seemed prepared to answer. Liam, Grace began, it is a simple question, Mom. Not an easy one, but simple. Grace looked at David, really looked at him, for the first time since returning to Columbus. She saw the man who had held her while she cried over organic chemistry homework, who had driven across town at midnight to bring her soup when she had the flu, who had made her believe that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. But she also saw the man who had built a successful career, who was working to save his employees' jobs even as his own world crumbled, who had looked at their son with such immediate and complete love that it had taken her breath away. Yes, she said quietly. I never stopped loving him. David's eyes widened as if he had not dared to hope for such an admission. Grace. Your turn, Dad, Liam said calmly, though Grace caught the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he was more invested in this conversation than his casual tone implied. David looked at Grace with an expression that was vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. I have loved you since I was 21 years old. Losing you broke something in me that I never learned how to fix. Every woman I have dated since then, including my ex-wife, was just a pale imitation of what I had with you. Grace felt tears threaten for the third time that day. David, I am not finished, he said gently. I love the girl you were, but I am in awe of the woman you became. I love your strength and your intelligence and your determination. I love that you built an empire while raising our son to be extraordinary. And I love that even after everything my family did to you, you came back not for revenge, but for justice. Liam nodded, as if David had passed an important test. Okay, so you love each other. What are you going to do about it? Grace and David stared at their son, then at each other, then back at their son. We should probably start slow, Grace said finally. We are different people than we were 18 years ago. Are you? Liam challenged. Or are you the same people, just with more experience and wisdom? Liam, relationships are not that simple, David said. Why not? You love each other, you respect each other, you share a son who wants his parents to be happy. You have already survived the worst thing that could happen to a relationship, being forced apart by outside interference. What exactly are you afraid of? Grace and David looked at each other, and Grace realized that her son had cut through 18 years of accumulated complexity to identify the real issue. I'm afraid of being hurt again, she admitted. I'm afraid of not being good enough for you, David said simultaneously. Liam rolled his eyes with the exasperated affection of a teenager dealing with obtuse adults. Mom, you are a multimillionaire CEO who built a technology empire from nothing. Dad, you are a Harvard-educated business executive who just learned how to actually lead a company instead of just managing it. You are both successful, intelligent, attractive adults who happen to love each other and share a son. What exactly is the problem here? Grace felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. When did you become the adult in this family? About the time I realized my parents were too scared to figure out their own love life without help from their teenager. Liam finished his sandwich and looked at them both with fond exasperation. Look, I am not saying you should get married tomorrow. I'm saying you should stop making excuses for why you cannot be together and start figuring out how you can be. David reached across the table and took Grace's hand, the first deliberately intimate contact they had shared since her return. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Just the two of us? Grace looked down at their joined hands, remembering how right it had felt 18 years ago when he had first taken her hand during a study session that had turned into something much more important. Yes, she said, I would like that very much. Good, Liam said, standing and gathering the remains of their makeshift meal. Now I'm going back upstairs to sit with my grandmother for a while. You two can figure out the details of your reconciliation without supervision from your son. After he left, Grace and David sat in the fluorescent-lit cafeteria, still holding hands across the table. He is remarkable, David said. He gets that from you, Grace replied. The confidence and the ability to cut through complicated situations to find simple solutions. He gets it from both of us. But mostly from you. David's thumb traced across her knuckles with the kind of gentle familiarity that 18 years had not erased. Grace, I want you to know that I am not expecting anything beyond dinner tomorrow night. What if I am expecting something beyond dinner tomorrow night? David's eyes darkened with something that might have been hope mixed with desire. Then I would say that our son is right about us being too scared to recognize what is right in front of us. Grace felt her heart speed up as she realized that the careful professional distance she had maintained was finally completely crumbling. What is right in front of us, David? A second chance? A real family? A future that neither of us dared to imagine when you walked into that boardroom last week. Grace looked at this man who had been her first love, her greatest heartbreak, and now possibly her greatest hope, and made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. I would like to explore that future with you, she said, carefully, slowly, with no expectations beyond seeing what develops. David lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. I love you, Grace Barnes. I have always loved you, and I will always love you no matter what happens next. I love you too, David Wittmann, despite everything, because of everything, in spite of everything. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, holding hands and planning their first real date in 18 years. While upstairs, their son got to know his grandmother and built bridges that neither of them had imagined possible a week ago. It was not the reunion Grace had planned when she decided to return to Columbus. It was infinitely better. The restaurant David chose for their first date was not what Grace expected. Instead of an expensive establishment designed to impress, he had selected a small Italian place in the Arts District, the kind of neighborhood restaurant where the owner knew most of the customers by name, and the atmosphere prioritized conversation over status. I thought about taking you somewhere fancy, David said, as they were seated at a corner table with wine glasses and soft lighting. But then I remembered that our best conversations always happened in simple places. Grace smiled, remembering the hours they had spent in coffee shops and diners during their college years, talking about their dreams and plans for the future over cheap food and refilled cups of coffee. This is perfect, she said, and meant it. They ordered wine and pasta and found themselves falling into the easy conversation that had always characterized their relationship. David asked about the early years of building SecureGen, and Grace found herself sharing stories she had never told anyone else about the challenges of being a young, single mother trying to establish credibility in a male-dominated industry. The worst part was not the long hours or the financial stress, she said, twirling linguine around her fork. The worst part was not having anyone to share the victories with. When I landed my first major contract, Liam was 8 years old. I called him at school to tell him we were going to be okay financially, and he said, "I knew you would figure it out, Mom." "You always do." And I realized that he had been worried about money, even though I had tried to shield him from it. David reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You should have had someone to celebrate with. You should have had someone to worry with you and support you and tell you how proud they were of your accomplishments. I had Liam. And honestly, for a long time, that was enough." "But not anymore." Grace met his eyes across the table, seeing her own hope and uncertainty reflected there. "I do not know. I spent so many years building walls around my heart that I am not sure I remember how to let someone in. We could learn together. We could take it slowly and see what develops. What if it does not work, David? What if we try to rebuild what we had and discover that too much has changed?" David was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. "Then we will have tried, and we will figure out how to be friends and co-parents instead of lovers." "But Grace, what if it does work? What if we discover that we are even better together now than we were 18 years ago? Grace felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is simple. Maybe we are the ones making it complicated because we are afraid to believe that we deserve to be happy." They talked through dinner and dessert and 2 cups of coffee, covering 18 years of separate experiences and discoveries. Grace learned that David had spent years searching for her online, that he had never stopped wondering what had happened to her, that his marriage had failed partly because he had never been able to love his wife the way he had loved Grace. David learned about the early years when Grace had worked 3 jobs while attending night school, about the first time Liam had asked why his father had never wanted to meet him, about the board meetings where she had been the only woman in a room full of men who assumed she was there to take notes rather than make decisions. "I wish I could have been there," David said as they walked to their cars after dinner. "I wish I could have supported you through all of that. I wish you could have been there too, but I also think I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms." They had reached Grace's car, and she turned to face him in the parking lot, illuminated by streetlights and the distant glow of the city. David stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent he had worn in college, and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Grace," he said softly, reaching up to touch her face with gentle fingers. "May I kiss you?" The question was asked with the same careful respect he had shown during their college years, when he had never assumed physical intimacy, but had always asked permission. Grace felt 18 years of careful emotional distance crumble completely as she realized that the man standing in front of her was still, fundamentally, the same person who had made her feel loved and valued and cherished when she was 19 years old. "Yes," she whispered. David's kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. But when Grace responded, winding her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a very long journey. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Wow," Grace said softly. "Yeah, wow." David rested his forehead against hers, his hands still framing her face. "I had forgotten how perfectly you fit in my arms." "I had not forgotten. I just tried very hard not to think about it." They stood together in the parking lot for several more minutes, neither wanting to end the evening that had been their first step toward rebuilding what they had lost. "I should go," Grace said finally. "Liam will be wondering how the date went, and I need some time to process everything before I face his very pointed questions." David laughed. "He really is going to want a full report, is he not?" Oh, absolutely. He has strong opinions about his parents' love life. Grace smiled up at David. What should I tell him? Tell him that his father is falling in love with his mother all over again, and that he has very good instincts about family relationships. Grace felt her heart flutter with possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider in almost 2 decades. And what should I tell myself? Tell yourself that you deserve to be loved completely and unconditionally by someone who sees your strength and your vulnerability and values both equally. David kissed her forehead gently. Tell yourself that some second chances are worth the risk. Grace drove home with David's words echoing in her mind and the taste of his kiss still on her lips. For the first time since returning to Columbus, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included not just justice and financial security, but love and partnership, and the kind of family she had dreamed of building before Eleanor Wittmann's interference had shattered those dreams. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely worth the risk. When she arrived home, Liam was waiting in the kitchen with hot chocolate and the expectant expression of someone prepared for a detailed debriefing. So, he said without preamble, how was it? Grace hung up her coat and accepted the mug he offered her, buying time to organize her thoughts. It was good. Really good. Define really good. We talked for 3 hours, we remembered why we fell in love in the first place, and he kissed me goodnight. Liam's grin was incandescent. And I think your instincts about your parents were absolutely correct. Does this mean you are going to start dating seriously? Grace sat down across from her son, marveling once again at his ability to navigate complex emotional situations with wisdom beyond his years. I think it means we are going to see what develops, slowly, carefully, with honest communication and realistic expectations. Good, because you deserve to be happy, Mom. And Dad seems like he might actually be worthy of you. Grace laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. When did you become such a romantic? When I realized that my parents are perfect for each other and just needed a little help figuring it out. Liam finished his hot chocolate and stood to rinse his mug. Now, if you will excuse me, I have college preparation work to do. Some of us have to actually earn our academic achievements. Liam? Yeah, Mom. Thank you for pushing us to be honest about our feelings, for believing that we could be a real family. Liam hugged her tightly, and Grace realized that her son had given her the greatest gift imaginable, permission to believe in love again. You are welcome, Mom. Now go call Dad and plan your second date. I have very high expectations for this relationship. Grace laughed as she pulled out her phone, already composing the text message that would continue the conversation she and David had started 18 years ago and finally had the chance to finish. The second date happened 3 days later, this time at Grace's house, where she cooked dinner while David and Liam worked together in the living room, assembling a new desk that Liam had ordered for his college dorm room. Grace found herself pausing in her cooking preparation to watch them through the kitchen doorway, marveling at how quickly they had developed an easy rapport. David was following Liam's methodical assembly instructions with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed the process, while Liam explained his plans for his MIT dorm room with the enthusiasm of someone who had found an interested audience. "Hand me that Allen wrench," Liam said, pointing to a tool from the scattered hardware. "No, the smaller one? There you go." "This is more complicated than the furniture I had in college," David observed, studying the instruction manual with the concentration of someone determined not to make mistakes. "Everything is more complicated now, but also more efficient if you approach it systematically." Liam aligned 2 pieces of the desk frame with practiced precision. "Mom always says that most problems can be solved if you break them down into manageable components and address each piece methodically." Your mother is a very wise woman. She is. She is also probably listening to this conversation from the kitchen because she wants to make sure we are getting along okay. Grace laughed despite herself, realizing that her son knew her better than she had thought. I am not eavesdropping, she called out. I am monitoring. What is the difference? David asked. Eavesdropping implies that I am secretly listening. Monitoring implies that I am openly observing for quality control purposes. Mom runs her household the same way she runs her company, Liam explained to David, with detailed oversight and strategic planning. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking amused and slightly overwhelmed. Should I be concerned about being managed? Only if you are planning to be inefficient or counterproductive, Grace replied, stirring the sauce for their pasta dinner. Are you planning to be inefficient or counterproductive? I am planning to be whatever you need me to be. The simple honesty of his answer made Grace's heart skip a beat. She set down her wooden spoon and looked at him directly, seeing the man who had once promised to support her dreams and was now, 18 years later, offering the same unconditional partnership. What I need is for you to set the table and open the wine while I finish cooking, she said. Think you can handle that? I think I can manage. Dinner conversation flowed easily among the three of them, covering topics from Liam's upcoming college courses to David's plans for restructuring the newly acquired Wittman Industries to Grace's expansion strategy for secure gen technologies. Grace found herself relaxing into the domestic rhythm of shared meals and family conversation in a way she had not experienced since Liam was very young. So what is the timeline for the Wittman restructuring? Liam asked, displaying the same analytical mind that had made him successful in academics and business. 6 months for the initial operational changes, 18 months for complete modernization, David replied. Your mother's acquisition plan is ambitious but realistic. Mom does not do anything that is not realistic. She might be optimistic, but she is never unrealistic. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest as she listened to her son and the man she loved discuss their future with the kind of collaborative planning that suggested a real family dynamic. What about the employee retention issues? She asked. We should be able to save about 600 of the 800 jobs, possibly more if the modernization goes as planned, David said. The key is retraining the existing workforce for the new technologies, rather than replacing them entirely. Liam nodded approvingly. That is a sustainable approach. Short-term costs, long-term benefits. Exactly. Your mother taught me that sometimes the most expensive option up front is the most cost-effective option overall. After dinner, Liam excused himself to finish college preparation work, leaving Grace and David alone to clean up the kitchen together. Grace found herself hyper-aware of David's presence as they moved around each other in the domestic space, his hand brushing against hers as they reached for the same dish towel, his shoulder bumping against hers as they worked side by side at the sink. This feels very natural, David said as he dried the last plate. It does. Almost like we have been doing this for years. David set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. Grace, I know we are taking this slowly, but I need you to know that this is not casual for me. This is not some nostalgic attempt to recapture the past. What is it then? It is a grown man falling in love with a grown woman and wanting to build a real future together. David reached for her hands, holding them gently. I am not interested in dating you casually or seeing what happens without commitment. I am interested in building a life with you and Liam. Grace felt her breath catch as she realized that David was offering her everything she had wanted 18 years ago and everything she had been afraid to hope for since returning to Columbus. David, that is a very serious statement. I am a very serious man when it comes to you. Grace studied his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or reservation. What she saw was steady determination and the kind of love that had survived 18 years of separation and misunderstanding. "I want that too," she said quietly. "I want to build a life with you. I want to be a real family." David's smile was incandescent as he leaned down to kiss her with the kind of passion that spoke of promises made and finally kept. Grace melted into his embrace, feeling 18 years of careful emotional protection dissolve completely. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Should we tell Liam?" David asked. Grace laughed, glancing toward the living room where they could hear the faint sounds of Liam's music playing through his headphones. "I think Liam already knows. He probably knew before we did. He's going to be insufferable about being right. He's going to be thrilled that his parents finally figured out what he has been telling us all along." David pulled her closer, holding her against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat and feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I love you, Grace Barnes. I love you and I love our son, and I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the 18 years we lost." "I love you too, David Wittmann. And I think the rest of our lives is going to be more than enough time to build something extraordinary together." They stood together in Grace's kitchen, holding each other and planning their future. While upstairs, their son smiled to himself and continued working on his college preparations, satisfied that his parents had finally caught up to what he had known all along. Some families were worth waiting for. Some love stories were worth the time it took to get them right. And some second chances were worth every moment of pain that had led to their possibility. Eleanor Wittmann died on a Tuesday morning in early November, quietly and peacefully in her sleep, with David holding her hand and Grace and Liam sitting vigil beside her hospital bed. Her last coherent words had been spoken to Liam the evening before. "Take care of your parents, grandson. They need you more than they know." The funeral 3 days later was a testament to the complex legacy of a woman who had wielded considerable power for 7 decades, not always wisely, but always with fierce determination to protect what she believed mattered most. The Episcopal Church was filled with representatives from Columbus society, business associates spanning 4 decades, and employees from Wittman Industries who remembered Eleanor as a demanding but fair employer during the company's golden years. Grace sat in the front pew between David and Liam, wearing a black dress that was appropriately respectful without being mourning attire. She had not expected to feel genuine grief for the woman who had destroyed her young adult life, but watching David struggle with his mother's death had awakened a compassion she had not anticipated. "She was not an evil woman," Grace said to David during the reception at the family estate afterward. "She was a woman who made terrible choices because she was afraid of losing control. That does not excuse what she did to you." "No, it does not. But it explains it. And sometimes understanding is the first step toward real forgiveness." David looked around the morning room where his mother had confessed her 18-year deception, where Grace had been forced to confront the woman who had shaped her life in ways both destructive and ultimately transformative. "What happens to all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the estate that had been home to 4 generations of Wittmanns. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I want to sell it. Use the money to establish a scholarship fund at the community college where you and I met. Something for single mothers pursuing business or technology degrees." Grace felt her heart swell with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his capacity for growth and generosity. Eleanor would hate that idea. No, she would not. I think she would finally understand that the best way to honor family legacy is to help other people build their own. Liam appeared beside them, having spent the afternoon moving efficiently through the gathering with the social skills of someone twice his age. The catering staff is cleaning up, and most of the guests have left. Are you ready to go home? Home. Grace realized that somewhere in the past few weeks, home had become wherever the three of them were together. Almost, David said. There is something I want to show both of you first. He led them upstairs to what had once been his childhood bedroom, now converted into his mother's private office. The walls were lined with photograph albums and scrapbooks documenting decades of family history, but David moved directly to a desk drawer that required a key to open. Inside was a manila folder marked Grace Barnes in Eleanor's careful handwriting. She kept a file on you, David said, handing the folder to Grace. I found it when I was going through her papers yesterday. Grace opened the folder with trembling hands and found newspaper clippings about secure gen technologies, printouts of business articles featuring her success, and copies of academic achievements and awards that Liam had earned throughout his childhood. The documentation was comprehensive and carefully organized, spanning nearly 15 years. She was tracking me, Grace said quietly. She was proud of you, David corrected. Look at the margins. Grace examined the articles more closely and saw handwritten notes in Eleanor's distinctive script. Brilliant strategic thinking. Impressive market positioning. This girl has exceeded every expectation. At the bottom of the folder was a letter addressed to Grace in an envelope that had never been sealed. Should I read this now? Grace asked. I think she wanted you to, Liam said gently. Grace unfolded the letter, written in Eleanor's shaking handwriting with a date from just 2 weeks before her death. My dear Miss Barnes, the letter began. I have spent 18 years watching you become everything I feared you could never be, and everything I should have known you always were. You built an empire while raising an extraordinary son, and you did it without any help from the family that should have supported you from the beginning. I was wrong about everything except your strength. You were never too small for our world. Our world was too small for you. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who mistook fear for wisdom and control for love. Your son is a credit to you and to the man his father is becoming. Take care of them both. They are the best of all of us. With respect and regret, Eleanor Catherine Wittmann. Grace felt tears stream down her face as she finished reading. She knew that she had underestimated you completely, David said. And she knew that her biggest mistake was not trusting me to make my own choices about love and family. Liam studied the folder's contents with the same analytical attention he gave everything else. She documented my entire childhood. Every academic award, every achievement, every newspaper mention. She knew exactly who I was, even though we never met. She loved you, Grace said softly. In her own complicated way, she loved you from a distance for 17 years. Then I am glad we had a chance to meet before she died. I am glad she got to see that her grandson forgave her. David closed the folder and handed it to Grace. This belongs to you now. All of it. The documentation of your success, the proof of her regret, the evidence that she finally understood what she had cost all of us. Grace clutched the folder against her chest, feeling the strange completion that came with having the last word in an 18-year argument she had never known she was winning. Thank you for showing me this. Thank you for giving her the chance to apologize. I know it was not easy for you to sit with her during those last days. It was the right thing to do, for you, for Liam, and maybe even for her. They drove home together through the November afternoon, past the office buildings and residential neighborhoods that had formed the backdrop of their separate lives for nearly 2 decades. Grace found herself looking at Columbus with new eyes, seeing it not as the place that had rejected her, but as the place where she had chosen to return and claim her victory. "Are you okay, Mom?" Liam asked from the back seat. "I am better than okay. I think I am finally free." "Free from what?" Grace considered the question as David pulled into her driveway. "Free from anger. Free from the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. Free to build whatever future I choose, with whomever I choose." David turned off the engine and looked at her with an expression of hope and love that made her heart race. "What future are you choosing, Grace? The one where we stop being careful and start being happy?" That evening, after Liam had gone upstairs to work on college preparation tasks, Grace and David sat together on her living room couch with a bottle of wine and 18 years of missed conversations to catch up on. "I have been thinking about what Eleanor said in her letter," Grace said, curled against David's side with her head on his shoulder. "About our world being too small for me." "What about it? I think she was right. If I had married you at 19, I might have been happy, but I would never have discovered what I was capable of achieving on my own." David's arm tightened around her. "Are you saying you are glad she interfered?" "I am saying I am glad everything happened exactly the way it did, because it led us to this moment. I'm saying that maybe some stories require the long way around to reach their proper ending." "And what is our proper ending?" Grace lifted her head to look at him directly. "I think our proper ending is actually our proper beginning. I think we spent 18 years becoming the people we needed to be in order to deserve each other." David shifted to face her fully, his hands framing her face with the gentle reverence of someone handling something infinitely precious. "Grace Barnes, will you marry me?" The question was asked simply, without grand gestures or elaborate preparation, but with the kind of quiet certainty that spoke of love tested by time and strengthened by adversity. "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, David Wittmann." When David kissed her, it felt like the completion of a promise that had been interrupted 18 years ago and was finally being fulfilled. Grace melted into his embrace, feeling every wall she had built around her heart crumble completely under the weight of love that had survived everything life could throw at it. "Should we tell Liam?" David asked when they finally broke apart. "Should we tell Liam what?" Liam's voice came from the stairway, where he was standing with a grin that suggested he had been eavesdropping. "That your parents are getting married," Grace said, laughing at her son's complete lack of surprise. "Finally," Liam said, coming down the stairs to hug them both. "I was starting to think I would have to stage an intervention." "You are not surprised?" David asked. "Dad, I've been planning your wedding since the day you met me." "Mom, I already researched venues that can accommodate a ceremony in 6 months after I start college, but before the winter weather gets too unpredictable." Grace stared at her son in amazement. "You have been planning our wedding. Someone had to. You two were too busy being cautious and responsible to handle the details yourselves." David laughed, pulling both Grace and Liam into a family embrace that felt like coming home after a lifetime of searching. "I love you both more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "We love you too, Dad," Liam said. "Now, can we discuss the practical considerations? I have very strong opinions about wedding planning." Grace felt happiness bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest as she realized that her 17-year-old son was absolutely right. They had spent enough time being careful. It was time to be happy. It was time to be a family. It was time to begin the rest of their lives together. The wedding planning took on a life of its own, driven primarily by Liam's systematic approach to event management and his apparent conviction that his parents' wedding should be nothing short of perfect. Within 2 weeks of the engagement, he had created spreadsheets detailing everything from venue options to catering menus, all organized with the kind of methodical precision that had made him successful in academics and business. "I think you missed your calling," Grace told him one evening as they reviewed his latest revision to the guest list timeline. You should consider a career in event planning. I think I should consider getting my parents married before they change their minds, Liam replied, highlighting potential conflicts in the scheduling matrix he had created. Besides, this is just applied project management with emotional components. David looked up from the vendor comparison charts Liam had prepared. Emotional components. Well, yes. You and Mom are both very successful in business because you are logical and strategic, but you are both completely hopeless when it comes to making decisions about personal happiness. So I am applying business methodology to relationship management. Grace and David exchanged glances across the kitchen table, both of them marveling at their son's ability to reduce complex emotional situations to manageable data points. What does that mean? Practically speaking, Grace asked. It means I have identified the optimal wedding date, venue, and guest count based on your mutual preferences, budget parameters, and schedule constraints. Liam turned his laptop screen toward them, revealing a presentation that looked sophisticated enough for a corporate board meeting. May 24th, the Columbus Museum of Art Sculpture Garden, 150 guests, ceremony at 4 o'clock followed by cocktails and dinner. David studied the presentation with the kind of attention he usually reserved for acquisition proposals. This is remarkably thorough, Liam. I am remarkably invested in your happiness. Also, I want my parents to have a wedding that reflects who they are now, not who they were 18 years ago. What is the difference? Grace asked. 18 years ago, you would have had a small ceremony focused on avoiding family drama and keeping costs low. Now, you are both successful enough to celebrate your love properly and mature enough to invite the people who matter without worrying about the people who do not. Grace felt her heart swell with pride and love for this young man who understood relationships with a clarity that continued to amaze her. Show us the venue options. For the next hour, Liam walked them through his research with the thoroughness of a professional consultant. He had visited 12 potential venues, evaluated each according to capacity, aesthetic appeal, catering options, and scheduling availability, then narrowed the options to 3 that met all their stated criteria. The sculpture garden has the best combination of elegant atmosphere and practical logistics, he concluded. Plus, it represents the kind of sophisticated, artistic environment that reflects your personal growth and professional achievements. You really have thought of everything, David said, clearly impressed by the level of detail. I had 18 years to think about what my parents' wedding should look like, Liam replied matter-of-factly. I was not going to waste that preparation time. Grace reached across the table to squeeze her son's hand. Thank you, sweetheart, for caring so much about this and for helping us figure out how to celebrate properly. You are welcome, but I am not finished yet. There is more. Liam grinned with the satisfaction of someone about to reveal his masterpiece. I also took the liberty of researching honeymoon destinations that would accommodate a working vacation for 2 CEOs who cannot completely disconnect from their businesses for more than a week. David laughed, shaking his head in amazement. Where did we get this kid? You got him from falling in love with the right woman 18 years ago, Liam said simply. And he got his organizational skills from watching his mother build an empire while maintaining work-life balance. Grace felt tears threaten as she realized that her son saw their love story not as a tragedy interrupted, but as a romance that had required time to reach its proper conclusion. What did you find for honeymoon options? She asked. Tuscany. Specifically, a villa outside Florence that offers cooking classes, wine tasting, art history tours, and reliable internet for essential business communications. Liam turned to another section of his presentation. 1 week of relaxation with cultural enrichment and the ability to stay connected to your companies without feeling guilty about it. David and Grace looked at each other across the table, both of them recognizing that their son had somehow managed to design the perfect wedding and honeymoon for two people who had spent so many years putting work before personal happiness that they had forgotten how to prioritize their own joy. "Liam," David said seriously, "this is extraordinary, but I need to ask you something." "What? Are you sure you are comfortable with all of this? With your mother and me getting married, with the changes it will bring to our family dynamic?" Liam looked at his father with the kind of patient affection usually reserved for people who were asking obvious questions. "Dad, I have wanted my parents to be together since I was old enough to understand what that meant. I have spent 17 years watching my mother be strong and successful and lonely, and I have spent the last few months watching you both become happier than I have ever seen either of you. Why would I not be comfortable with that?" "Because it changes everything," Grace said softly. "Your living situation, your family structure, your relationship with both of us." "It changes everything for the better," Liam corrected. "Besides, I'm leaving for college in 7 months. This way, I get to see you both happy and settled before I go, instead of worrying about leaving Mom alone and wondering if Dad will ever figure out how to be part of a real family." David felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized that his son had been carrying concerns about both his parents' happiness for far longer than any teenager should have to. "You have been worried about us," he said. "Of course I have been worried about you. Mum spent 18 years building an amazing life, but never letting herself fall in love again. You spent 18 years trying to fill a hole in your heart that could only be filled by one person. I am 17, not stupid." Grace stood and moved around the table to hug her son tightly. "I am sorry you had to worry about my happiness, sweetheart. I'm not sorry. Caring about your parents' happiness is part of being a family. And now I get to stop worrying and start celebrating. So you approve of the May 24th wedding date?" David asked. "I strongly recommend the May 24th wedding date," Liam corrected. "I approve of you two finally admitting that you are perfect for each other and deciding to do something about it." Grace looked at David over their son's head, seeing her own wonder and gratitude reflected in his expression. They had somehow managed to raise a young man who understood love and family and commitment with a wisdom that surpassed most adults, and who was generous enough to share that wisdom with the parents who needed it most. "May 24th it is," Grace said. "Tuscany honeymoon?" David asked. "Tuscany honeymoon," Grace agreed. "Excellent," Liam said, returning to his laptop with obvious satisfaction. "Now we can move on to the really important decisions, like flowers and music, and whether you want a traditional wedding cake or something more sophisticated." "More sophisticated how?" Grace asked. "I was thinking a dessert bar featuring multiple options, including some items that reflect your individual personalities and shared history." Liam opened another file. "For instance, chocolate soufflé to represent the first dinner I cooked for Dad, tiramisu to represent your shared love of Italian food, and individual chocolate lava cakes because they are elegant but also indulgent." David stared at his son in amazement. "You have really thought of everything. I told you, I had 18 years to plan this wedding. I was not going to let the opportunity go to waste." Grace felt her heart overflow with love for both of these men who had somehow managed to create a family that was stronger and happier than anything she had ever dared to imagine. "In that case," she said, "I think we should let you handle all the planning details while your father and I focus on the important part." "Which is learning how to be married to each other." Liam grinned. "That part should be easy. You have been practicing for the last few months without realizing it." Grace looked at David, seeing her own recognition of this truth reflected in his smile. They had been building a marriage already, through shared dinners and collaborative business decisions and late-night conversations about dreams and fears and the future they wanted to create together. The wedding would just make it official. Everything else, they had already figured out. 3 weeks before the wedding, Grace received a call that changed everything about how she understood her own success story. She was in her office, reviewing quarterly projections, when her assistant buzzed with the news that the Secretary of Homeland Security was on the line with an urgent matter requiring her immediate attention. "Miss Barnes," the Secretary's voice was crisp and professional. "I am calling to inform you that Secure Gen Technologies has been selected to lead the development of a new national cybersecurity initiative. This is a $200 million contract with the potential for expansion to $500 million over 5 years. Grace felt the air leave her lungs as she processed the magnitude of what she was hearing. "I am honored by the selection, Mr. Secretary. May I ask what factors influenced the decision?" "Your company's track record speaks for itself, Miss Barnes. But more importantly, your personal story has become something of a legend in government circles. The single mother who built a cybersecurity empire from nothing, who proved that American innovation and determination can overcome any obstacle. You represent exactly the kind of success story we want to support and showcase." After the call ended, Grace sat in her office staring out at the Columbus skyline, trying to absorb the reality that her company was about to become one of the most important cybersecurity firms in the United States. The contract would make Secure Gen Technologies worth over $1 billion within 5 years, establishing her as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. But more than the financial implications, Grace was struck by the Secretary's description of her as a symbol of American innovation and determination. The girl who had been told she was not good enough for the Wittmann family legacy had become a national representation of what was possible when talent met opportunity, met unbreakable will. She called David first, then Liam, sharing the news with the two people who understood best what this achievement meant in the context of her 18-year journey from pregnant teenager to national business leader. "I am so proud of you," David said when she finished explaining the contract details, "but I'm not surprised. You have been building toward this level of success since the day I met you. Are you ready to be married to someone who's about to become significantly more wealthy and prominent than you are?" Grace asked, only half joking. "Grace, I fell in love with your ambition and intelligence long before I knew how successful you would become. Your achievements do not intimidate me. They inspire me to be worthy of being your partner." Liam's reaction was characteristically direct and practical. "This is amazing, Mom, but it does not change anything about our wedding plans, does it? Because I have vendors booked and timelines established, and major contract announcements should not disrupt optimal event scheduling." Grace laughed, marveling at her son's ability to maintain perspective in the face of life-changing news. "No, sweetheart, it does not change anything about the wedding plans." "Good. Because I have worked too hard on those plans to have them disrupted by your continued overachievement." The news of the government contract broke in the business press 2 days later, generating a wave of media attention that transformed Grace from a successful regional entrepreneur into a national business celebrity. Interview requests flooded in from major magazines and television networks, all wanting to tell the story of the single mother who had built $1 billion empire. Grace found herself fielding calls from literary agents wanting to discuss book deals, speaking bureaus offering lucrative contracts for corporate presentations, and venture capitalists eager to invest in whatever project she might consider next. "It is overwhelming," she confessed to David during one of their evening walks around her neighborhood. I spent so many years focused on building the company that I never considered what would happen if I actually achieved everything I was working toward. What do you want to happen next? Grace thought about the question as they walked past houses where families were settling in for the evening, children finishing homework while parents prepared dinner and planned for the next day. I want to marry you and raise our son and run my company and maybe start a foundation that helps other single mothers build their own businesses. Grace stopped walking and turned to face him. I want to use this success to create opportunities for women who are where I was 18 years ago. David's smile was incandescent. That sounds like the perfect next chapter, does it? Even if it means less time for quiet domestic life, more travel, more public attention. Grace, I did not fall in love with you because I wanted a quiet domestic life. I fell in love with you because you are extraordinary, and extraordinary people do extraordinary things. David took her hands, holding them gently. I want to support your ambitions, not limit them. I want to be the partner who helps you achieve everything you are capable of achieving. Grace felt her heart swell with love for this man who saw her success not as competition, but as inspiration, who wanted to build her up rather than diminish her to make himself feel more important. I love you, David Wittmann. I love you too, Grace Barnes, soon to be Grace Wittmann. Actually, I think I'm going to stay Grace Barnes professionally. The name has recognition value now, and it represents everything I have built on my own. And personally, Grace smiled, feeling the deep contentment that came with making a decision that honored both her independence and her commitment to partnership. Personally, I will be Grace Barnes Wittmann. I want to carry both names, to represent both the woman I became on my own and the woman I am choosing to become with you. Grace Barnes Wittmann, David repeated, as if testing how it sounded. I like it. It sounds like someone who can do anything she sets her mind to. It sounds like someone who learned that the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is building a life so extraordinary that the people who tried to hold you back become irrelevant to your happiness. They walked home together through the November evening, planning their wedding and their honeymoon, and the life they would build together as equal partners in love and ambition. Grace found herself thinking about Eleanor's letter, about the old woman's observation that some of the best things that happen to us come from the worst things that happen to us. 18 years ago, being forced to leave Columbus had felt like the end of everything she had hoped for. Now she understood that it had been the beginning of everything she had been meant to become. The girl who had been told she was not good enough had become the woman who was more than good enough, the woman who was ready to share her extraordinary life with the man who had always been worthy of her love. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect May weather that seemed designed specifically for outdoor celebrations. Grace woke in her own bed for the last time as Grace Barnes, feeling a mixture of excitement and profound contentment that she had never experienced before. Today she would marry David Wittmann in front of 150 people who represented the life she had built and the family she had chosen. Tonight she would begin her honeymoon as Grace Barnes Wittmann, partner to the man she had loved since she was 19 years old and mother to the most extraordinary young man she had ever known. Liam knocked on her bedroom door at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the kind of satisfied expression that suggested all his wedding planning was proceeding according to schedule. "Good morning, bride," he said, setting the tray on her bedside table. "Everything is on track. The flowers have been delivered to the venue, the caterers are setting up, and Dad is at his hotel having what he described as a completely manageable level of nervous breakdown." Grace laughed, accepting the coffee he offered her. Nervous breakdown about what? About marrying someone who is significantly more successful than he is, about being worthy of you, about being a good stepfather, about the usual things that insecure grooms worry about. Liam sat on the edge of her bed with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had been her closest confidant for 17 years. I told him that if you thought he was worthy of you, his opinion was irrelevant. And what did he say to that? He said I was absolutely right, and that he was going to focus on being the best husband and father he could be instead of worrying about whether he deserved the opportunity. Her Grace felt her heart swell with love for both of these men, who understood that worthiness was not about achievement or status, but about character and commitment and the willingness to grow into the people they needed to be for each other. "Are you nervous, Mom?" Grace considered the question seriously. "I am excited, I am happy, I am grateful, but nervous. No, I do not think I am nervous at all." "Why not?" "Because I know exactly what I am doing. I am marrying the man I have loved for 18 years, and I am doing it with the support of the son who taught me that family is not just about blood relations, but about choosing to love and care for each other no matter what challenges life presents." Liam smiled with the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from seeing years of planning and hoping finally come to fruition. "In that case, you should eat your breakfast and start getting ready. You have a wedding to attend." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Grace's hair and makeup team arrived at 9 o'clock, transforming her bathroom into a professional salon. Her dress, a stunning creation in ivory silk that managed to be both elegant and contemporary, hung in her closet like a promise of the day ahead. At noon, her closest friends and business associates began arriving to help with final preparations and provide the kind of emotional support that made getting married feel like a celebration rather than an ordeal. The women who had supported her through years of building her company, who had cheered her successes and comforted her through challenges, now gathered to help her prepare for the most important day of her personal life. "You look radiant," said Patricia Chen, SecureGen's chief technology officer and Grace's closest friend among her business colleagues. "But more than that, you look happy. Really, truly happy." "I feel happy," Grace replied, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror. "For the first time in 18 years, I feel like everything in my life is exactly as it should be." At 3 o'clock, the photographer arrived to capture the final preparations. Grace found herself thinking about the girl she had been at 19, scared and pregnant and convinced that her life was over. That girl could never have imagined that she would someday stand in a beautiful bedroom surrounded by successful women who respected and admired her, preparing to marry the love of her life in a ceremony that celebrated everything she had achieved and everything she was still planning to accomplish. At 3:30, the cars arrived to take the wedding party to the Columbus Museum of Art. Grace rode with Liam, who looked extraordinarily handsome in his perfectly tailored suit and who had somehow managed to coordinate every detail of the day's logistics while maintaining the calm demeanor of someone who had everything completely under control. "Last chance to change your mind," he said as they pulled into the museum parking area. "About what?" "About marrying Dad. About becoming a stepmother. About taking on the complicated dynamics of blending our family with his." Grace looked at her son, seeing the young man who had been her partner and co-conspirator for 17 years, who had supported her ambitions and celebrated her successes, and who was now generous enough to share her with the father he was still getting to know. "Liam, are you having second thoughts about this wedding?" "I am having no thoughts about this wedding except gratitude that it is finally happening," he replied immediately. "But I wanted to make sure you knew that whatever happens, you will always be my mom first, and I will always be proud to be your son." Grace felt tears threaten to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life, sweetheart. Nothing will ever change that. Good, because I have worked too hard planning this wedding to have you back out now." The ceremony was everything Liam had promised it would be: elegant, intimate, and perfectly suited to the people Grace and David had become. The sculpture garden provided a stunning backdrop of art and nature, while the gathered guests represented the communities they had built through years of professional success and personal relationships. Grace walked down the aisle on Liam's arm, feeling the weight of every choice she had made over the past 18 years leading to this moment. When she reached the altar where David waited in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his face illuminated with love and wonder, she felt the last piece of her life fall into perfect place. "You look beautiful," David said, as Liam placed her hand in his. "You look like the man I have been waiting 18 years to marry," Grace replied. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditional elements and personal touches that reflected their unique journey to this moment. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to face challenges as partners, and to build a family based on love and respect and honest communication. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, David's kiss was gentle and reverent and full of promises for the future they would build together. Grace felt 18 years of careful emotional protection dissolve completely as she realized that she was finally, completely, unconditionally loved by the person who mattered most. The reception that followed was a celebration of everything they had overcome and everything they were planning to achieve together. Liam's toast to his parents was perfect, heartfelt, funny, and wise in the way that had characterized his approach to family relationships since childhood. "To my parents," he said, raising his champagne glass toward the head table where Grace and David sat holding hands, "who proved that some love stories require the long way around to reach their happy ending, but that the best endings are worth waiting for." Grace danced with her new husband to music that Liam had selected, surrounded by friends and family who had supported her journey from single mother to successful entrepreneur to beloved wife. She felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing that every challenge she had faced, every obstacle she had overcome, had led her to this moment of perfect happiness. "Any regrets?" David asked as they swayed together to their first dance as husband and wife. "Only that it took us 18 years to get here." "I do not know," David replied, holding her closer. "I think we needed those 18 years to become the people who deserved each other." Grace looked around the reception at their son managing logistics with professional efficiency, at their guests celebrating the love story that had finally reached its proper conclusion, at the life she had built through determination and hard work and unbreakable faith in her own possibilities. "You know what I think?" she said. "What?" "I think Eleanor was right about one thing. Some of the best things that happen to us do come from the worst things that happen to us. And I think our story is just beginning." 6 months later, Grace Barnes Wittmann sat in her expanded office overlooking downtown Columbus. Reviewing the quarterly reports that showed SecureGen Technologies was ahead of schedule on the government contract and positioned to become one of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firms in the United States. The company now employed over 300 people across 4 offices, and Grace found herself fielding acquisition offers from major tech corporations on a weekly basis. She had turned them all down. SecureGen Technologies was her creation, built from nothing but ambition and intelligence and 18 years of uncompromising determination. She was not ready to sell it to become a division of someone else's empire, no matter how lucrative the offer. A knock-knock. David's voice came from her office doorway. "Do you have time for your husband, or are you too busy conquering the technology industry?" Grace looked up from her reports and felt the same flutter of happiness she experienced every time she saw him. Marriage to David had been even better than she had anticipated, a partnership of equals who supported each other's ambitions while building a family life that felt both stable and exciting. "I always have time for my husband," she said, standing to greet him with the kind of kiss that suggested they were still very much in the honeymoon phase 6 months after their wedding. How are the quarterly numbers? Extraordinary. We are going to exceed projections by 30% this quarter, and the government contract is generating interest from private sector clients who want similar cybersecurity solutions. David's smile was incandescent with pride and admiration. You are amazing, do you know that? I am successful, Grace corrected. There is a difference. No, you are amazing and successful, and the woman I fall in love with more deeply every day. Grace felt her heart skip a beat as she realized that marriage had not diminished the romantic tension between them, but had somehow intensified it. Knowing that David was completely committed to their partnership, that he supported her ambitions without reservation, had made her feel more secure and confident than she had ever imagined possible. Speaking of falling in love, she said, I have something to tell you. What? Grace had been planning this conversation for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share news that would change their life together in ways both wonderful and terrifying. I am pregnant. David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, concern, and finally, pure elation. Pregnant? Are you sure? I am sure. 8 weeks along, according to the doctor. Due date is early next spring. David sank into the chair across from her desk, looking stunned. We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby, Grace confirmed. At 42 and 38 years old, we are going to start over with midnight feedings and diaper changes and all the chaos that comes with a newborn. How do you feel about that? Grace considered the question seriously. 18 years ago, discovering she was pregnant had been the most terrifying moment of her life. This time, it felt like the completion of a family she had always dreamed of having. I feel excited, nervous, grateful that this baby will be born into a family that wants and loves and will support them completely. Grace moved around her desk to sit on the arm of David's chair. I feel like we are being given a chance to experience parenthood the way it was supposed to be the first time. David wrapped his arms around her, holding her with the reverent care of someone who understood the magnitude of what they were being given. What does Liam think? I have not told him yet. I wanted to tell you first. When will you tell him? Tonight, when he calls from MIT. I think he is going to be thrilled to be a big brother, especially since he will be away at college and will not have to deal with the day-to-day reality of living with a baby. David laughed, imagining their son's practical approach to the news of a new sibling. He is going to want to create spreadsheets for baby preparation, is he not? Oh, absolutely. I expect we will receive a comprehensive analysis of optimal baby gear, feeding schedules and childcare options within 24 hours of telling him. They sat together in Grace's office, planning for a future that included everything they had worked for: professional success, financial security, a strong marriage, and now a growing family that would represent the best of both of them. Grace, David said softly. Yes, thank you. For what? For giving me this life. For forgiving my family's mistakes. For building something so extraordinary that I get to be part of it. For loving me enough to let me love you back. Grace felt tears threaten as she realized that the scared teenager who'd been driven out of Columbus 18 years ago had somehow managed to build not just a successful company, but a life filled with love and purpose and infinite possibility. Thank you for being worthy of everything I had to offer, she replied. Thank you for becoming the man who deserved the woman I worked so hard to become. What happens next? Grace looked out the window at the Columbus skyline, at the city that had rejected her as a pregnant teenager and now celebrated her as one of its most successful entrepreneurs. In a few months, She would be balancing a billion-dollar company with a newborn baby, probably setting new standards for executive working mothers in the process. Next, we build the rest of our life together. We raise our children, we grow our businesses, we support each other's dreams, and we prove that some love stories really do get better with time. David stood and kissed her with the kind of passion that spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled, and a future that was limitless in its potential. I love you, Grace Barnes Wittmann. I love you too, David Wittmann. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. Outside, the city of Columbus stretched out below them, a testament to American ambition and the kind of success that comes from refusing to accept limitations imposed by other people's fears. Grace Barnes had returned to claim her victory. What she had discovered was that the greatest victory was not revenge, but the life she had built in spite of everything that had tried to stop her. The girl who had been told she was not good enough had become the woman who was more than enough, and her story was just beginning. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.